What do you mean Olivia will own the company? My voice was steady, but my hands clenched under the table. The grand chandelier hanging above the dining room cast a warm glow, yet the air between us had turned ice cold. My father, Henry Monroe, barely looked up from his plate, calmly cutting into his steak as if this was just another casual conversation. He sighed, his tone patient, like he was explaining something simple to a child. "Vanessa, let's be realistic," he said. "You're brilliant at technical work, but leadership, that's not your strength. We need someone with presence, someone who commands respect. Olivia is the best choice." Across from me, Olivia, perfectly poised in her designer dress, took a slow sip of wine, a small knowing smile playing at her lips. She hadn't lifted a single finger when Monroe Industries was drowning in debt. She wasn't there when I worked through endless nights, writing the software that saved us. But now that the company was thriving, she was being handed everything. "I built the software that saved this company," I said, my voice sharp, slicing through the quiet clinking of silverware. "Without it, there wouldn't even be a company to pass down." Dad chuckled as if I had just told a joke. Then, with a casual air, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and tossed a crumpled bill onto the table. "For your effort," he said. I stared at the $50 bill lying between my plate and my untouched wine glass. $50. $50 for the years I had spent working late into the night, writing code until my vision blurred. $50 for the countless sleepless weeks I had spent analyzing financial losses, designing a system that didn't just save us from bankruptcy, but propelled Monroe Industries to the top of the industry. $50 for turning a dying company into a $300 million empire. My mother, Margaret Monroe, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, casting a worried glance my way. But she said nothing. No one did. I looked at my father, the man I had idolized growing up, the man I had spent my life trying to make proud. And in that moment, I understood. It was never about merit. It was never about effort or success or even loyalty. It was about control. "I see," I said quietly. My fingers curled around the $50 bill, turning it over once before folding it neatly into my napkin. Then I stood. "Vanessa, don't be dramatic," Dad scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm excusing myself. Clearly, my role in this family is nothing more than a background character, so I'll remove myself from the scene." Olivia let out a soft chuckle, barely hiding her amusement. "Vanessa," my mother started, but I was already walking away. My heels echoed against the polished marble floor as I left the dining room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't argue or demand fairness. I simply left. The next morning, I arrived at work early, as I always did. The office had changed over the past year. Just 12 months ago, Monroe Industries had been suffocating under the weight of its own failure. Whispers of layoffs, department heads quitting before the inevitable collapse. Now, it was thriving. My software had revolutionized the logistics industry, transforming processes that used to take weeks into mere minutes. We had expanded globally, securing contracts with major clients. But today, something felt different. As I walked through the lobby, I noticed the way conversations hushed when I passed, the nervous glances exchanged between employees. Then, I reached my office. The door was already open. Inside, my desk had been emptied. My computer was gone. Even the nameplate that once read Vanessa Monroe, CTO, had disappeared. Sitting in my chair, flipping through some documents with a bright, artificial smile was Olivia. "Oh, good morning, Vanessa," she said cheerfully. "Didn't Dad tell you? I'll be moving into this office. You'll be reporting to me now." My stomach twisted, but I kept my expression calm. "What's my position?" I asked evenly. She tilted her head as if considering. Then she shrugged. "We'll figure something out. Maybe something in IT support." IT support. In the company I had built. The company I had saved. She smirked. "Dad suggested you take some time off, actually. Relax, maybe work on some hobby projects. But don't worry, you'll still be part of the company, in some capacity." I took a slow, measured breath. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. They wanted me out, after everything I had done, after every sacrifice, after every sleepless night spent keeping this company alive. They were discarding me like an afterthought, like I was worth $50. I looked at my sister, then at the company logo on the glass wall outside my office. Monroe Industries, a name that once meant family, loyalty, legacy. Now, it only meant betrayal. But I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I simply nodded, understood. Then I turned and walked out. They thought they had won. They thought I would disappear quietly. They had no idea what was coming next. As I stepped out of the office, my head high and my pulse steady, only one thought burned in my mind. Watch me. The first thing I did was disappear. Not physically, but strategically. The next morning, I still showed up at Monroe Industries, taking my assigned spot at the cramped desk shoved into the farthest corner of the office. I was surrounded by interns who had no idea who I was, reduced to a nameless figure in the very company I had once led to greatness. I didn't complain. I didn't protest. I observed. And within a week, I saw exactly what was happening. Olivia Monroe was in over her head. She had no idea how to lead a company, let alone one that had just scaled into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse. She spent her days drowning in meetings, making impulsive decisions based on gut feelings rather than data. Worse, she ignored the department heads who tried to guide her, replacing them with friends, people whose only experience in business was picking the right bottle of champagne. The company was crumbling before my eyes, and I had built everything they were now destroying. That's when I made my decision. If they didn't want me at Monroe Industries, I would build something bigger. Late one evening, long after the office had emptied, I sat in a dimly lit cafe across from three of the smartest, most capable people I had ever worked with. Nathan Carter, our former CFO. He had kept the company's finances afloat when we were on the verge of collapse, understanding every loophole and regulation like a second language. Isabel Reyes, a brilliant data analyst. She had practically designed our entire customer profiling system from scratch, making us the leader in predictive analytics. Ethan Grant, my closest collaborator, a lead engineer who had built the core of my software alongside me, coding through the night, fueled by caffeine and pure determination. One by one, they had resigned over the past month. They weren't fools. They saw what was coming. Nathan leaned forward, his expression serious. "So, Vanessa, what's the plan?" I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. Inside was everything I had been working on in secret. "We're starting over. I didn't have to convince them. They were already in. There was one thing Olivia and my father had overlooked. Yes, Monroe Industries legally owned the software, but the most advanced version, the one I had been perfecting, had never been uploaded to their servers. It was still mine. For the next month, I worked in silence. I refined it, made it faster, stronger, more powerful than anything the industry had ever seen. Then I made my move. I pitched it. Not to Monroe Industries, but to their competitors. Within 3 weeks, I had multiple offers. By the end of the month, I had signed a $50 million contract. And just like that, I wasn't just competing with Monroe Industries. I was about to bury them. The first cracks in their empire appeared quietly. A longtime client, one that had been loyal to my family's company for over a decade, suddenly pulled their contract. Then another, and another. Panic spread through Monroe Industries like wildfire. Olivia reacted the only way she knew how, by blaming everyone but herself. She fired department heads at random, demanded answers, and desperately tried to keep control. But the truth was simple. The industry had moved on. My software, the future, was now running their competitors' systems. And Monroe Industries? It was outdated. And I was just getting started. 6 months later. I sat in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel, champagne in hand, as the keynote speaker wrapped up their presentation. This was the Tech Innovators Gala, one of the biggest industry events of the year. Every major CEO, investor, and executive was here. And this year, I was the guest of honor. The host's voice echoed through the room. Tonight, we celebrate the visionaries shaping the future of our industry. One individual, in particular, has revolutionized the way global corporations operate. With cutting-edge technology and an unmatched drive for innovation, she has built a company now valued at over $500 million. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vanessa Monroe, founder and CEO of Titan Dynamics. The applause was deafening as I rose from my seat and walked toward the stage, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor. And then, as I looked out into the crowd, my eyes locked onto a familiar face. Henry Monroe, sitting in the back next to Olivia. Their company was on the brink of bankruptcy again, and they both knew it. I smiled, not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because I had finally learned the lesson they had tried so hard to teach me. I didn't need their validation. I had won, on my own terms. And this time, there was nothing they could do to stop me. The latest quarterly report was in, and I could barely suppress a smile. Revenue, $320 million, market share, 48%, and climbing. Meanwhile, Monroe Industries was bleeding out. I had systematically dismantled every advantage they once held. Their clients had abandoned them, their stock had plummeted, and just a week ago, their financial report had leaked to the press, confirming what I already knew. They were on the brink of collapse. And then, the inevitable happened. At exactly 10 au choquet. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Vanessa, your father and sister are here to see you. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. So, it had finally come to this. Send them in. They walked in like ghosts. Olivia's designer outfit couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She had spent months trying to keep up the illusion of control, but the weight of her failure was finally sinking in. And my father, Henry Monroe, a man who had always carried himself with authority and certainty, looked older, defeated. They had lost, and they knew it. Vanessa, my father began, his voice carefully measured. We need to talk. I gestured toward the seats in front of my desk. They hesitated, probably realizing, for the first time in their lives, that they were stepping into my territory. Finally, they sat. Olivia fidgeted, tapping her manicured nails against the armrest, her gaze fixed anywhere but on me. My father sighed. Look, we've had our differences, but at the end of the day, we're family. Monroe Industries is struggling. We need your help. Ah, there it was. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm. Finally, I spoke. And what exactly are you asking me to do? Henry leaned forward, his expression carefully composed. We're willing to offer you a leadership position, something meaningful. I realize now that we may have underestimated you. I tilted my head. You realize now? Olivia finally looked up, her jaw tight. Vanessa, don't be petty. We need you. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. You need me? I repeated. That's funny, because a year ago you told me I wasn't leadership material, that I was only good for technical things. My father's jaw tensed. You know how business works. Decisions were made. But now, we need to move forward. If you come back, we can rebuild Monroe Industries together. Control. They didn't want me. They wanted to own me. I leaned back in my chair. And what position are you offering? I asked, feigning curiosity. Henry straightened his shoulders, clearly thinking he was sealing the deal. You would be second in command, right beneath Olivia. I blinked. Then I laughed again, louder this time. Olivia's face flushed. Vanessa, grow up. You built some software, fine. But that doesn't mean you know how to run a company at our level. My laughter stopped instantly. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the desk between us, and made sure my voice was as cold as ice. Olivia, I said smoothly, my company is worth $500 million. Yours is weeks away from bankruptcy. So explain to me again, which one of us doesn't know how to run a company? Silence. Pure, satisfying silence. My father cleared his throat. Vanessa, please. That was what did it. Please. The same man who had dismissed me, belittled me, thrown money in my face as if I were nothing more than an underpaid employee, was now begging, and I had never felt more at peace. No. Olivia stiffened. Excuse me? I met her gaze, unwavering. I said no. I repeated it, slowly, deliberately. I don't need Monroe Industries. You needed me, and you threw me away. You made your choice. Now, you get to live with it. My father exhaled sharply, frustration seeping into his voice. You're seriously going to let your own family fail? I smiled, calm and collected. I didn't let anything happen. You destroyed this company the moment you put Olivia in charge. Olivia shot up from her chair, her face red with anger. You're just bitter, she snapped. You've always been jealous of me. I gave her a slow, amused smile. Jealous? I repeated. Olivia, I don't need to be jealous. I already have everything you wanted. I stood as well, smoothing down my blouse. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a real company to run. Henry Monroe rose in furious silence. Olivia stormed toward the door, but just before she left, she turned back, her voice sharp with resentment. I hope you're happy, Vanessa. I met her gaze, utterly calm. I am. She walked out without another word, and as the doors clicked shut behind her, I let out a long, slow breath. They thought they could walk in here, throw a few hollow apologies at me, and expect me to clean up their mess. They had no idea who I had become. But as much as I enjoyed watching them squirm, I knew this wasn't over. Monroe Industries was dying, and when a sinking ship goes down, it pulls everything and everyone down with it. The only question was, would I let that happen? 3 days later, I got my answer. The news broke. Monroe Industries had officially declared bankruptcy. It was everywhere: business magazines, online forums, national headlines. Former industry giant Monroe Industries collapses overnight. Poor leadership decisions sink a $300 million company. how greed and family politics killed Monroe Industries. And the best part? Every single article credited the company's former success to me. They all pointed out the obvious. The only reason Monroe Industries had survived its first near collapse was because of the software I had built. And the moment I was gone, it was only a matter of time. The headlines spread like wildfire. Monroe Industries collapses overnight. Poor leadership decisions sink a $300 million empire. How greed and family politics killed Monroe Industries. And the best part? Every single article credited the company's past success to me. They spelled it out plainly. The only reason Monroe Industries had survived its first brush with death was because of the software I had built. And the moment I was gone, it had been inevitable. I was in a strategy meeting when my assistant, Claire, knocked on the door. "Vanessa, you might want to see this." She handed me a printed document. I skimmed through it, my lips curving into a slow, knowing smile as I reached the final paragraph. Monroe Industries was being liquidated. Everything was up for sale. The headquarters building, the remaining assets, even the Monroe name itself. Henry Monroe had been desperate, taking out loan after loan, hoping for a miracle that never came. And now, with nothing left to offer, the banks were seizing everything, and I could buy it. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. That night, I sat in my penthouse apartment, staring out over the glittering city skyline. I had already won. Titan Dynamics had overtaken every major competitor, including the sinking remnants of my family's company. I had nothing left to prove. So why did this still feel unfinished? I thought back to that night, exactly 1 year ago, when my father had tossed a $50 bill onto the table as if I were a waitress collecting tips, like I was worth nothing. That was when my decision became crystal clear. The next morning, I didn't go through investment firms. I didn't hide behind third parties. I wanted them to know exactly who was taking everything from them. So I called the bankruptcy attorney handling Monroe Industries liquidation myself. "I'd like to place a direct bid on all of Monroe Industries' assets," I said. There was a pause. "Ms. Monroe," the attorney said carefully, "do you understand what that would mean?" I smiled. "I understand perfectly." A week later, I sat in the same boardroom where my father had once ruled over his empire like a king. Only this time, I was the one holding the crown. The final contract lay before me, a sleek black and gold pen resting on top. With a single signature, Monroe Industries would belong to me. The company my father had built, the one he had refused to let me lead, was now mine. Henry Monroe and Olivia sat across from me. Both of them looked ashen-faced. My father had aged at least 10 years in the past week. Defeated, hollow. Olivia wouldn't even make eye contact. She had spent a lifetime thinking she was untouchable, that the world would bend to her will. Now, she was staring down the wreckage of everything she had been handed and destroyed. "I still can't believe you're doing this," she muttered. I raised an eyebrow. "Doing what?" I asked smoothly. "Buying a failed company? Acquiring a name that no longer holds any value?" She scowled. "You know exactly what I mean." I leaned back, tapping my fingers against the polished wood of the table. "Funny," I said, tilting my head. "A year ago, you didn't think I was capable of running a company, but now you're acting like I have too much power." My father let out a heavy sigh. "Vanessa," he said sharply, "just sign the damn papers." I picked up the pen, letting it hover over the contract, paused. Then I slid the documents back across the table. My father blinked. Olivia frowned. "What is this?" Henry asked, his voice wary. "A counteroffer," I said simply. He picked up the papers, scanning the first page. His eyes widened. "You're dissolving Monroe Industries?" Olivia gasped. "You're shutting it down?" I smiled. "That's right." My father's expression twisted in rage. "Why would you do that?" I leaned forward, my voice calm and steady. "Because I don't need Monroe Industries," I said. "I never did." I turned to the final clause of the contract and pointed. "But I do want one thing." My father followed my finger. His breath caught. Olivia snatched the document and read aloud, her voice shaking. "All remaining rights to the Monroe name, patents, and intellectual property will be absorbed by Titan Dynamics and permanently retired." She looked up at me, her face twisted with fury. "You're not just buying it," she whispered. "You're erasing it." I met her gaze, unwavering. Yes. There would be no revival. No chance for the Monroe name to be rebuilt. No opportunity for history to be rewritten. The company that had once tried to bury me would simply cease to exist. My father clenched his jaw, his hands tightening into fists. "You're just doing this to get back at us." "No," I corrected, my voice smooth and certain. "I'm doing this because some things deserve to die." I picked up the pen again. And this time, I signed. And just like that, it was over. The Monroe era was gone. And in its place, Titan Dynamics soared. With no competition from my father's failed empire, we expanded rapidly, securing exclusive contracts that had once belonged to Monroe Industries. Their legacy had been erased. Mine had only just begun. 3 months later, a letter arrived. No return address, just a simple handwritten note inside. "Vanessa, I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll understand." "Dad." I stared at it for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, I walked over to the fireplace and tossed it in. The flames curled around the paper, devouring it whole, and as the last remnants of Monroe Industries turned to ash, I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I was completely free. It had been 3 months since I signed the final document, ensuring that Monroe Industries would never rise again. 3 months since my father and sister walked out of that boardroom with nothing. And for the first time since this entire war began, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Titan Dynamics was thriving, expanding aggressively, dominating markets that had once been my father's pride. Revenue, $500 million. Market dominance, 62%. Status, the undisputed leader. But it wasn't the numbers that satisfied me most. What truly mattered was walking through my office every morning and seeing a company built on merit, innovation, and hard work. Employees who had earned their place, not ones who were handed power because of their last name. A company where talent spoke louder than bloodlines. I had built this, without my family, without their approval, without their validation. I was free, or so I thought, because the past has a way of lingering, no matter how far you think you've moved beyond it. The invitation arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. A simple cream-colored envelope with elegant gold lettering. At first I didn't recognize it. Then I saw the words printed across the front. The Monroe Family Annual Gala. I had almost forgotten about it. Every year, for as long as I could remember, my parents had hosted the most exclusive event in the industry. A gathering of the most powerful figures in business, a place where deals worth millions were whispered over champagne. But this year, Henry Monroe wasn't hosting it. Someone else had taken over. Someone who had bought my family's mansion at auction after the bankruptcy. The invitation was nothing more than a formality. Whoever had sent it had no idea about the history between me and the Monroes. It was an accident that I had even received one. I should have tossed it in the trash. But instead, I stared at it for a long moment. And then, I made a decision. I was going. Not to prove anything. Not for revenge, but to end this story once and for all. The night of the gala, I arrived in a sleek, custom-tailored black gown, stepping out of my car with the effortless confidence of a woman who had nothing left to prove. The venue was as extravagant as I remembered. Glittering chandeliers, an orchestra playing elegant music, and a sea of wealthy elites sipping champagne, pretending they still controlled the world. Except this time, I was the most powerful person in the room, and they all knew it. Whispers followed me as I made my way inside. Is that Vanessa Monroe? No, she runs Titan Dynamics now. Didn't she destroy her father's company? I ignored them. I wasn't here for them. I was here for one thing. And then I saw them. My father and sister stood near the far side of the room, a shadow of what they used to be. They were no longer the center of attention, no longer surrounded by executives hanging on to their every word. They weren't the power players anymore. They were just guests at an event that used to belong to them. For the first time, Henry Monroe looked smaller than I remembered. His once commanding presence had faded, replaced by something I had never seen in him before: regret. Olivia, on the other hand, still held herself with that familiar arrogance, but I could see the cracks in her mask, the way her fingers clenched too tightly around the stem of her champagne glass, the way her eyes darted toward me, then away. For the first time in our lives, I was the one with the power, and they both knew it. I walked toward them, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Olivia stiffened. My father turned, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not resentment, just defeat. "Vanessa," he said. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I tilted my head slightly. "Dad." A long silence stretched between us. Then he sighed. "I suppose this is the part where you gloat." I smiled slightly. "No, Dad. This is the part where I say goodbye." Olivia blinked. "What?" "I didn't come here to rub this in your faces," I continued. "I didn't come to remind you of everything you lost. Because frankly, that's not my concern anymore." I set my drink down on a passing tray and met my father's eyes one last time. "For years, I spent my life trying to earn your approval, trying to prove I was good enough. But I don't need that anymore." I turned to Olivia, "And I don't hate you. I never did." She scoffed, folding her arms, but I saw it. The slight tremor in her fingers. "I just pity you," I finished. Her expression hardened. "Excuse me?" "Because unlike you, I didn't steal power." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "I built my own." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I gave them both one last look. Then I walked away. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because for the first time in my life, I was free. I left the gala without looking back, without the need to prove anything, because this was never about revenge. This was about becoming who I was meant to be. As I slid into the back of my car, the city lights flashing past the tinted windows, I took a deep breath. I was heading back to a company, a legacy, a future that was completely my own. And as I leaned back, letting the weight of the past finally fade, I smiled. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.